Android 16, the one android that has always had one question that has puzzled fans. Was he created in the future? And if so, what evidence is there to support or reject that claim? Well, to answer this fan theory, alrighty guys, it is Qaaman here today, and welcome back to another episode of Dragon Ball Z Theory, the series where I analyze fan theories, my own theories, or any unsolved mystery of the Dragon Ball world. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into this video. So let's start off with the statement phase of this theory. It is believed that Android 16 could have been created in the future. Next, let's move on to the data step where we break down both the supporting evidence and the contradiction evidence. Let's start off with support. Although it's not direct evidence, fans have often believed that because 16 numerically comes before 17, 18, 19, and 20, that he must have been created first. Next, during the third volume of the Android Full Color Manga edition, Akira Toriyama was asked about the model of Android 16. In it, he states, "The model for number 16 was Dr. Gero's son, who died young long ago. He was a high-ranking soldier in the Red Ribbon Army, but he was felled by an enemy bullet. Having a special place in his heart for his own child, Gero gave number 16 great power and a fearsome explosive mechanism. But not wanting him to be destroyed in battle if possible, he gave him a gentle personality, which caused number 16 to become a failure." Now, some of you may think that because Toriyama said this in an interview years after the manga was finished, that makes this irrelevant. However, even if it came afterwards, we can't rule out the concept for number 16, which was something that Toriyama could have considered. With that said, because 16 was said to be Gero's son that died, this would take place before the android threat, meaning creating 16 would have been an idea from way before the android attack even began, suggesting that he could have been created. In the Japanese version, Dr. Gero even tells Android 18 before she activated 16 in the present that he was working on him for a long time, which at least gives us something to go by. And last, for support, there's a short excerpt from the manga that actually states that all of the androids before Android 16 were actually scrapped because of the fact that all of them had some flaw or another. Now for contradictions. In an anime-only flashback where Cell discusses the future, Dr. Gero's lab can be seen being destroyed by the androids, leaving only Cell's chamber intact. Now, for those of you who don't know, there are two alternate future timelines. There is one where Cell killed Trunks and stole his time machine to go towards the present timeline that we know, and there's also the future timeline that we know the future Trunks from the history of Trunks came from. However, because of the fact that Android 16 was absent when Cell was showing his flashback, that suggests that 16 wasn't around. Next, going back to the future and the present, both Trunks and Cell had absolutely no idea who Android 16 was. But Cell having no knowledge of 16 has significantly more weight. For Trunks originally had no idea where Dr. Gero's lab was, and was only aware of Android 17 and 18 because of the fact that they were causing havoc in his future. In Cell's case, Cell was artificially programmed to have a memory of Dr. Gero's goals and creations, and the fact that Cell was completely clueless as to who Android 16 was hints that Android 16 was not created in the future. And next, for our other contradiction, in the manga, Trunks states that androids 19 and 20 were the ones who originally destroyed his future, as Toriyama intended for both 19 and 20 to be the main villains. Toriyama pretty much changed them to being androids 17 and 18, making 19 and 20 the new androids in the story. This proves that using lower numbers like 16 is completely irrelevant to when the androids were actually created. So now, let's move on to the reasoning phase where we argue for both sides of the story. First, we must argue the notion that Android 16 could have blown up in the explosion. Because Cell as a small fetus managed to survive, that means that it is likely that 16 could have been in his chamber and was just simply never shown. So on this argument, the support wins even though there was no sign of 16. Next, on the subject of Cell, his complete lack of knowledge sways this argument strongly. As mentioned before, the support has absolutely no argument to back up the fact that both Trunks and Cell had no clue who 16 was. And considering the fact that Cell developed and probably walked around Dr. Gero's lab for a while before he actually ventured out into the world, suggests that 16 was not in the future at all, which definitely supports the contradiction, as the support has no defensive mechanism for this argument. And for our next argument, as mentioned before, you would think that 16 comes before 17, 18, and 19, and you would also think that because Dr. Gero based 16 on his son and stated to work on 16 for a long time, that 16 should exist. However, when you factor in the divergence in both timelines, that pretty much meant that Trunks going back in time added 3 new androids to the scene. This says clear-cut that 16 existed solely because Trunks traveled back, and that also suggests that the contradiction wins this argument once again. So to move on to the validation step where I pretty much sum up my argument, the theory is rejected. Using numbers to say 16 was created first means absolutely nothing. In the future, 19 and 20 were originally supposed to be the evil androids that destroyed humanity. Also, Toriyama states that 16 was based on Gero's son. There is no evidence to prove that applies to the future, as he may have only come up with that idea for the present timeline, as the original future timeline actually came first. So ultimately, the thing that really changed this argument for everything would have been Cell. Cell's complete lack of knowledge for 16 completely helped the contradiction win this argument. If there is one entity that should know everything about Android 16 or all of Dr. Gero's creations, it should be Cell, especially a Cell that came from the original timeline. And the fact that both Cell and future Trunks had no clue who 16 was says otherwise. So guys, that has been my video for today. Overall, I'd like to thank Little Tyke 4000 for suggesting this theory video today. In addition, I also think it's important to mention that although it's fan fiction, this theory was popularized because of the fact that Dragon Ball Multiverse actually had a chapter where they discussed both Trunks and Android 16. Pretty much what happens is that Trunks goes towards Dr. Gero's lab and actually finds Android 16, and both Trunks and Bulma rebuild Android 16 so that 16 can help assist in rebuilding the future. I'd also like to thank Kanzenji for providing many of the sources used throughout this video, and I'd also like to make a quick disclaimer saying that if you disagree with what I said in this video, just understand that I believe that there's a lot more evidence to disprove this fan theory than to actually support it, considering the fact that the support is actually very loose in nature. So with everything else said, please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. And remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys. And for our hashtag of the day, I have #AndroidArnold.